And I know I'm recording and we'll mark this well, but just to make sure, are you still a professor of New Testament at Northern Baptist Theological Seminary?
We just call it Northern Seminary, but yes.
Just Northern Seminary. Okay, Northern
Yeah.
Seminary. And then, okay, ordained with the Anglican with Anabaptist leanings. I looked on Wikipedia and got your
Yeah.
bio. So I just want to make sure this is good and right. All right, we'll go. Well, hey, hello, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're joining us via YouTube, this is Josh Bertram. I'm your faithful host. It's great to be with you again. And of course, we have our political host, Will. Will, how are you doing today?
Doing excellent. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. Thanks for answering. And today we're going to be interviewing Dr. Scot McKnight, Professor Scot McKnight. He is an American New Testament scholar, historian of early Christianity, a theologian, and an author who has written widely on the historical Jesus, early Christianity, and Christian living. He's currently a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary in, I'm going to say this wrong, Lizzle? How do you say that?
Lyle.
Lyle. What?
Lyle.
What is wrong with me? Lizzle for shizzle. You know what I mean?
That's probably the Swiss pronunciation.
Yes, that's what it
Lizzle.
is. I'm Swiss.
Right.
I'm getting in touch with my Swiss roots, if I have any. So he is an ordained minister in the Anglican denomination, and has also written frequently on issues in modern Anabaptism and Christianity. So thank you so much for coming on the show with us, Dr. McKnight. Is it okay if I call you Scott, or should I call you Your Majesty?
I go by Scott.
All right, well, we'll call you Scott. And Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show with us.
Thank
really
you
appreciate
for
it.
having me. Good to
Absolutely.
meet both of you.
You too. And today we're going to be talking about your book, Revelation, your new Revelation for the Rest of Us, which is a new book that you have written. And we want to dig into the idea of Revelation and see how it's applying to us today, what difference it makes. And so I just got to ask, why would you write a book on Revelation? Are you a glutton for pain? What's going on? What happened there?
I got interested in the book of Revelation in 1972, maybe 71, fall of 71. Okay. And it was a spasmodically important era in speculation about the book of Revelation, speculation about the rapture. It was bordering on, let's say, close to a generation beyond the rebirth of Israel in 1948. I heard sermon after, enough sermons that a generation is 30 years, maybe 40. So we were on the cusp of the rapture. At that time, Hal Lindsey's
Nice.
late great Planet Earth was very big. I never actually read that book, but I read a book like it that I've heard Hal Lindsey got his ideas from, but I've just heard that as speculation. By Salem Kurban, he wrote a book called Guide for Survival, and it was for people who ended up in the tribulation and were not raptured, and this would be their guide to survive the tribulation.
Guide.
And then he wrote a big book called 666, but he was big.
I have one. Survival handbook, baby, for the rapture when I don't make it. Okay.
Well, that's not Salem Kurban. So that was a book I read. Then when I got to college, right away, Robert Gundry wrote a book called The Church in the Tribulation, in which he argued for a post-trib rapture. This created lots of controversy. Gorbachev was the crucial guy in Russia, and he had a big birthmark on his head, which could be the mark of the beast. And then I heard other people say it was Henry Kissinger because he had an accent or something like that. So it was a really fun time in the sense that if you were interested in it, I got interested in it. I wanted to take a course in my Christian college at the time called Grand Rapids Baptist on eschatology, and the professor would not let me in the class because he said I knew too much about what was going on and it would distort the classroom. And no, he was a model professor for me. He influenced me deeply. He just said, "Come to my office every now and then. We'll talk about this stuff." And then he gave me his notes and stuff like that. So by the time I got to seminary, now we're talking late 70s and early 80s, I got very disinterested in the question. I just thought, it's over for me. I'm not worried about this. It was during my PhD days, so in the early 80s, that I read all the Jewish apocalyptic literature that was available to me and became convinced that the book of Revelation needs to be read the way apocalyptic literature is read, rather than the way I call them the speculators or the dispensationalists read the book. And but from that point on, basically, my thinking about Revelation was just haphazard. I read about it. I read the Bible. Occasionally, I would read a book. I'd hear a lecture. I gave one lecture a year so per class when I taught Introduction to the Bible at North Park University. So maybe 3 times a year, I would say some things about Revelation. But my ideas were always percolating, and I was listening and reading. And just a few years ago, I had a D-Min student ask me if I would teach one of the courses on Revelation. And I told him, his name is Greg. I said, Greg, I want to, but I don't have time to prepare that set of lectures. And then a couple years, maybe a year or two later, all of a sudden, I had time for that, and I worked on it with a student who was an extraordinary student from Canada named Cody Matchett, and we ended up writing the book, Revelation for the Rest of Us, which is supposed to rhyme with Festivus for the rest of us.
It's amazing.
Yes, I love it.
Okay, so maybe just to level set. I mean, so I profess my Christian faith, but if I'm, if we're being truthful, I think I've read Revelation, but I couldn't. It's not one of those like books in the Bible that I'm frequently quoting or anything like that. So for the lay person, to include myself, like, give us like an overview of what is the book of Revelation, just so we can kind of put it in context.
Well, that's good. Well, I can see why you would say what you said. When you enter the book of Revelation, it's like entering into a bizarre world. It's like, what in the world is this book about? Now, chapter 1 is okay, but there's some visionary stuff. Chapters 2 and 3, pretty reasonable churchy stuff. Then all of a sudden,
letters to 7 churches.
7, yeah, they sound like Paul's letters a bit. Not really, but kind of. They're a lot shorter than Paul's letters. Then chapters 4 and 5, you are escorted to heaven into the throne room of God, which sort of a mystical experience of some sort. And that's how most people would experience it. Like, wow, what is this? Is this real? Is this a dream? Is this a vision? And what does a vision mean? Then in chapters 6 through 16, 6 through 19, depending on how you break it up, it's just an unrolling of judgments on whomever. 17 to 19, you realize the whomever is Rome, the city of Rome and the empire. And it is very strong condemnation. The goddess Roma is turned into a prostitute who has seduced the nations of the world to bring their money and their power to her. And she now has all the power sitting on the 7 hills of Rome. And the prediction is that this is all going to collapse. The empire is going down, and it's going to be replaced by New Jerusalem. That's the book of Revelation right there in a nutshell.
Dude, that is a great summary. Go ahead, Will.
No, I was going to say, okay.
Let me give you an even tighter summary.
Okay.
The book of Revelation's message is reduced to 3 statements. by a guy I know named Randy Harris. Number
Great.
1, God's team wins. Number 2,
Nice.
choose your team. Number 3,
wisely.
Don't be stupid.
All right.
Well, there you go,
that's really
dude.
good. Yeah, totally.
There's your scholarly.
Who wrote
Go ahead.
the book of Revelation, and I guess why is it so different than the rest of
Yeah,
the
that's good.
books?
Well, we don't really know who wrote the book of Revelation. It's often attributed to the Apostle John. Could be another John, a guy in Ephesus named Elder John. It could be. So I'm not into being dogmatic about it. We have a little excursus about this. I think Cody wrote that. All right. But the reason the book of Revelation is so popular or attractive of bizarre interpretations and people's theories is because it's filled with images that require interpretation. And when it requires interpretation, you have to, say, lay down your cards. And people lay down different cards. So there's 2 beasts, one from the sea, one from the land. There's a dragon. Now, the dragon is identified as Satan. That's not very difficult to figure out who the dragon is. But the beasts are usually connected in Christian tradition with the Antichrist, a specific Antichrist, and his false prophet. And the minute you say that, and then you start tying an Antichrist with the book of Revelation, and you think it's predicting the future, people start trying to figure out if Vladimir Putin is the Antichrist. Or is it
Yes.
Benjamin Netanyahu? All right. Or is it the director? Is it Arafat? Was it Arafat? Is it, the director of Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran? It's just one thing after another. And, okay, I put it this way. I don't know who your audience is, and if they're
Christians, non-Christians,
okay,
liberal,
if they're of a certain
conservative.
sort, they could be offended. So I just want them to understand to put on their earplugs, and that is, every one of these interpretations so far has been wrong,
Yes.
and it hasn't changed how people interpret the book of Revelation one bit. So right now, there's all kinds of speculation because this is the makings of Armageddon right there in Israel on the Gaza Strip. I mean, they're blowing the place up like crazy. Hamas is attacking Israel, the people of God. So all of a sudden, there's all this speculation about who this is. And I'm willing to say right here on Faithful Politics that the predictions that are going on right now are going to be proven to be wrong.
Yes.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being here with us.
Listen, Scott, listen. This book told me that the rapture is going to happen at some point here. Look, I got to find it for you. Look, the rapture happens here, wherever it is. This book tells me that. And then, of course, I'm being silly.
Is that Larkin's?
Let's see. Who is it?
William Larkin?
Fleming H. Revel Company.
That's Revell is the publisher. I think that's William Larkin. I've seen that.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yes. So I found this at an old bookstore one day, and I said, I got to get this thing because I didn't have anything that showed me dispensationalism so clearly as that. And I was going through it with Will right before the show. But so let me just throw something by you, right? Because this is the kind of stuff that we hear from friends. I'm sure that you've heard all of it. Revelation, let's see, Revelation 17:9. It says, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits, and there are also 7 kings. So there's a 7-mountain mandate. And that basically means that Christians are supposed to go and take over all 7 mountains of culture. and we're supposed to win it. And the apostolic age has returned, and there's new apostles that we need to get their covering. So I already know what the book of Revelation says. So why should I read the book? Why should I?
25 years, Josh. The new apostolic reformation and the Dominion theologians will be proven wrong about their interpretations. The seven hills are Rome, and it's a first century document speaking to a first century city. But the critical thing is, it gives profound wisdom to discern political corruption that is contaminating the church. So the sins of Rome in chapter 17 through 19 show up as sins in the seven churches. So I call it Babylon creep. There's the creeping of Babylon into the church. And this is not something that happened just in the first century. This is a timelessness about political corruption and what it does. And it teaches us that the powers of the age, okay, now I'm going to get political, but I'm going to get Christian political rather than...
This is faithful politics.
That's right.
Please do.
I'm going to be biblically faithful and not faithful when it comes to a party, is that it's anti-God, it's idolatrous, is that it wants to replace God with the power of the state. It is concerned with opulence and wealth and luxury. These are the marks. The amount of money that even with Jesus in Galilee at Capernaum, that was at work in Tiberias or Sepphoris, but especially in Jerusalem and in Caesarea Maritima, where Pilate is hanging out, and nothing compared to what was happening in Rome. It's Petronius' Satyricon in the Feast of Trimalchio. This is a text in the first century, or about the first century, just is a massive description of the nonsense, luxury, and indulgence of a first century feast. It was murderous in that it persecuted. This Revelation 17 teaches us that this woman is killing the people of Jesus for witnessing to the way of the Lamb. There was militarism at the highest level. Rome's machine it was unbelievable because, it dominated the world so far as Rome cared. Nobody cared about really about India and China in the Roman Empire, which tells you something, or the farther reaches, the southern reaches of Africa. But nonetheless, at that time, Rome owned the world and the empire through its military power, and it was a machine that could grind up anyone who wanted to fight it. Now, they had quite a battle with Jerusalem in 66 to 73, and it was really quite a battle, but Rome pulled out its power and just decimated the place, and it's still to this day, that temple, all you can see is that western wall. Everything else is underground. It was economically exploitative. One of the most profound scenes and descriptions of ancient trade and merchandise is described in Revelation 17 to 19 about what all the cargo that was heading toward Rome and what people were buying that were totally unnecessary, including human bodies as slaves. And of course, one of the marks of the woman of Babylon and Rome was arrogance. It was the belief that no one's going to do anything to us. A sort of, we want to be great again. That sort of mentality is a mark of arrogance. There is nothing that I just gave you there that is not timeless in politics, in our world. And every party, every government, every state, every city, every village has the temptations of idolatry, opulence. People take advantage of other people's taxes, always. There's maybe not persecution, but there's silencing. There's militarism that countries will use against somebody else. There's economic exploitation for the sake of the people who have a lot of money and they want more. And there's arrogance. It's about domination. People who want to control the world and control everything about it. So power. It is a profound text, Revelation 17 to 19. And I think that's where we have to begin reading the book of Revelation rather than picking up the newspaper and trying to figure out if Putin is the Antichrist. So,
or if like whatever those weird locusts were actually helicopters. Haven't you heard that? Like he didn't know how to describe them.
A guy named S.I. McMillan wrote a book called "Discern These Times," in which he made it clear that those locusts were actually B-52 bombers. But now we have much better airplanes.
Yeah, B-52 bombers. Come.
I know, but now here's the thing I would say. I understand why people would want to point to Putin or to Netanyahu. And I understand that they see in them something like what they think is going to happen in the end of time.
Antichrist-like.
Here's the mistake. The mistake is to think that the book of Revelation is predicting a single character in the future rather than providing a template for discerning who is like the Antichrist in our world. In that sense, all the predictions have been wrong and right at the same time. Wrong for thinking it was the final Antichrist, right in seeing in their corrupt political power-mongering and violence and exploitation, they've seen marks of the Antichrist, or they've seen marks of the beast and the dragon. And I translate beast as wild things. So, yes, I see in Putin the sort of things that you see in a beast in Revelation. I see in Netanyahu the same thing. And I see in our nuclear buildup the same thing.
So, and real quick, Will, so are you telling me that I didn't take the mark of the beast by taking the COVID-19 vaccine?
That's right. Now, when I was younger than you are, it all had to do with barcodes. That was the mark of the beast.
Nice.
Now it's QR codes.
QR codes, that's right.
You know, I'm curious, and you're gonna have to forgive me because Josh, we'll have to rely on Josh to ask probably the more informed theological questions, and I'm just like I said, the lonely political guy. But with all the talk about like the Antichrist, mind you, like my understanding of the Antichrist is very limited. So I mean, I came to the faith in 2008. I wasn't raised in the church or anything like that. So a lot of what I know about the Antichrist is, I don't know, either through my own reading, through movies, or, through Josh's sermons. So, because I go to his church, which he doesn't really talk about the Antichrist very often.
Good.
So is there like a checklist for me to like qualify Antichrist type behavior, that, this person is arrogant. Okay. Yeah. That's the first check mark, and then I go down the list and then, I say, yep, like this person is more likely than not to be, the Antichrist.
Well, okay. Well, here's how it works. Now I'm not saying this is biblical, but this is the interpretive tradition. And you can read, Daniel Hummel's book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism, if you want to read a good book about how this is all developed. But it has to be let's say, an international leader of consequence. So, the king of Bahrain, it doesn't matter in this one, okay? Second, it has to be somebody who's against Israel. And because the United States is hitched to Israel, it has to be against us as well, because we're on the team that's going to win because God is with us. So there's an incredible amount of arrogance on the part of Americans to think that it could never be their president. It could never be their government that would be involved in these sorts of things. Now, That's the way people predict it. So you got to have someone who's an international leader, who is against Israel and probably against the United States. And in tradition, they've connected it to a passage in the book of Ezekiel to Gog and Magog, and that is going to put them up toward Russia. So it was particularly helpful for all these people who speculated that Russia under Stalin and then Khrushchev and Gorbachev and all these people, Brezhnev, they all fit the bill because they were connected to Gog and Magog. They were against Europe. They were against the United States. They were against Israel. So then now you can tie in Iran and Iraq and the Arab countries that are against Israel. So that's the sort of paradigm that people are using, which frankly has absolutely nothing to do with the book of Revelation. But it's a part of the tradition. The book of Revelation is about Rome, and it's about New Jerusalem. It's not about Russia, and it's not about the United States.
Man, I got so many questions, but in your book, you talk about the concept of a dissident disciple. That kind of concept comes up. How does this concept, how is it different from American Christianity? How is it different from conventional Christian discipleship? And if it is, and what inspires you to kind of delve into this idea of a dissident disciple? How did this idea come about?
Yeah, Josh, this is a good question. And one of the unfortunes of focusing on a book like Revelation for a political theory is that it only has one angle. I mean, there's a different angle if you read, let's say, 1st and 2nd Kings, which is trying to tell you how to be a good king, or Romans 13, where Paul shows respect, or even 1 Peter chapter 2 and 3, or the pastoral epistles, where clearly Christians are trying to figure out how to live in the Roman Empire in a way that keeps themselves out of trouble all the time. But the book of Revelation just flips the script and goes right after Rome and gets very negative. So it teaches dissidence, not as a constant critique of government, but as a way of life under certain circumstances. When the Roman Empire is opposed to the way of Christ, and when it puts pressure on those who want to witness to Jesus Christ and worship Jesus Christ, then the believer is to become a dissident resistor of the way of Babylon and the way of Rome. Now, we live in a country that largely, we can never forget this, largely supports Christian faith. It doesn't completely sanction everything we believe, but it certainly is not against people believing in Jesus. It's supposed to be a nation that has tolerance for other religions, which has not been typical in the history of the world. Different religions have often been seen as different cultures invading. So I think in our country, the book of Revelation gives us a template for recognizing corruption, while we would also be required to applaud what is good in the government and in politics. So
that's really good. How does the book of Revelation point to Jesus? Because again, for somebody like me, it doesn't seem all that obvious. And maybe it doesn't. But I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the first chapter is a vision of Jesus Christ, and he becomes the Lord of the church. And every one of the letters, if you want to call them letters or messages, as Jeff Wyma does, every one of those messages begins with a statement that comes from Revelation chapter 1. So the vision of Jesus. In Revelation 4, we get the throne room of God. In Revelation 5 and 4 and 5, we get a vision that the Lion of Judah, which is an image of Jesus, as a roaring lion, becomes a lamb. And from that point on, the lamb dominates the picture of Jesus in the book of Revelation, who is an agent of God's disciplines and judgments against corruption in this world. And in the end, the lamb is the temple, so there's a lot of people think the book of Revelation is fundamentally a message about Jesus Christ. I think that is true in the sense that there's a lot about Jesus, but that book of Revelation is not what you would call a straightforward Christology. It's not that sort of theology, but it does say a lot about Jesus as the Lamb who conquered by being slaughtered, and who will conquer evil by the sword from its mouth rather than through violence. Although there is, I tell my students, if you're gonna, apocalypses gonna apocalypse. They're gonna have a battle, and they're gonna have a winner and a loser, and it's gonna be light and darkness. It's going to be winners and losers. It's going to be pretty graphic at times. That's what apocalypses do.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I wonder if John was writing today, if he would have like zombies in it and like Terminator and stuff like that. Like, I have no idea.
I've had my students say this very thing. I don't even know anything about zombies, and I don't even know who the Terminator is. So, but my students say this. This is like what Marvel movies, like the Black Panther.
Yes,
I watched that one, and I didn't have any idea what Marvel movies were, but it's just sort of. I mean, it's just this. It's the classic, good versus evil. And
good versus evil.
The winners are good, but it's messy, and that's what apocalypses do. So
very
it's part of the
messy
game that they play. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the idea of resisting Babylon, right? Which Babylon, if I'm understanding you correctly, Babylon is the imagery the writer of Revelation chose to use to kind of represent Rome, was this idea of Babylon. So this is this idea of resisting Babylon. How do you kind of think that this ancient symbol of Babylon, what would that be? And we kind of got into this, but what would be some equivalents, do you think, today? It's kind of getting into the application of it, because when I'm thinking about the book of Revelation, again, so much of it, I thought, oh man, it's so imagery rich. But then it's like this idea of heaven coming down to earth, and this idea of Christ reigning forever and ever and ever, and this idea of the way that Jesus may come back, and then the resisting of Babylon. How do these images, how do they instruct us on how to worship and how to resist today?
All right.
If that makes sense.
The first thing is the operative words in the book of Revelation for the Christian life are wisdom, witness, and worship. Wisdom to discern the presence of Babylon in the world. Witness means verbally to express our experience of redemption in Jesus Christ, and to put our life on the line in that witness that might lead to martyrdom. The word martyr and the word witness are connected in Greek. A martus is a witness, is somebody who is killed. And then worship. Here's what I would say, Josh. The more we worship the Lamb, the more we worship the God on the throne who has revealed himself in the Lamb, the more capable we are of discerning the presence of Babylon in our world today. The more capable we are of discerning political corruption, idolatry, exploitation, violence, opposition to the people of God. The less we worship, the more dull our perceptions and discernment and wisdom will be. The more we worship the Lamb, the more faithful we are as witnesses to the Lamb, the more wisdom we will have in discerning the presence of Babylon in our world. And I think those are the 3 W's of the book of Revelation's understanding the Christian life: wisdom, witness, and worship.
Witness and worship. Man,
Yeah.
that's profound. That's profound.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your commentary, maybe about the Christian church in modern day America. You spent kind of your entire life, learning more about the Bible, and you understand it in a way I don't know if I will ever understand it. And which makes me somewhat intimidated when I do approach like the scripture, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is about. Like, and I'll read and I'll try to do some research and I'll try to figure it out. And like, I had a conversation with somebody recently. We were talking about like same-sex marriage or something like that, and I was like, I am ill-equipped to really have this conversation, but I don't personally view it as a problem. If the Bible views it as a problem, like, I'm not smart enough to pick out the sort of like phrases that will like justify my position. So I'll just take the kind of human response and just treat everybody equally. So, but that wasn't always like how the Bible was applied. The Bible has kind of been used across the ages to, I don't know, like enact all kinds of really, really bad stuff, from like slavery to segregation to doctrine of discovery. So I'd love to kind of maybe get your commentary about how are people applying the Bible today, and do you see this? Do you see their application as a net positive for the kingdom, or doing some really, really detrimental damage to it?
Well, John Dixon wrote a book sort of about this, on the history of the church, is the good and the bad and the ugly. The church has done a lot of good. Hospitals, justice visions are almost all rooted in the prophets of Israel and in the visions that are picked up in the New Testament. At the same time, the church has done a lot of bad, and the church sometimes aligns itself with political powers. The Church of Russia right now is aligned with Putin against Ukraine, and Ukraine is in the same church as the oligarchs, or whatever you want to call them, of the Russian church. So they've surrendered to Putin and to Caesar what is God's. So there's a lot of corruption too. So it's the good and the bad and the ugly, Will. It's not one or the other. I think it is the responsibility of Christians to pay attention to the impact of their witness and their lives. And when their lives are witnessing to the wrong thing, they need to check and figure out what's going on, and to repent and to restore their reputation over time by faithful living. And I think we need to hold up examples of good people, and we have plenty of examples of crazy people in the church. Right now, the Southern Baptist Church has made a horrendous decision to align itself with a decision that means people have a very limited time to make reports about sexual abuse in churches and pastors. And you think, what in the world is going on when they make decisions like this? And that's just one. The Catholic Church has made decisions. We've all done things that we're embarrassed by. So you can't expect perfection, but we should expect a faithful witness in a more comprehensive collective sense than what we're seeing today. And the church is being called out for it, and the church has earned every bit of it. So, but how we make moral decisions, I think, is a very important decision. And, I'm a Bible guy, and I've been doing this for more than 4 decades as a professor. So I got involved in serious Bible studies when I was 17 years old, and I've been doing it for 53 years. And so I like doing this, but I do think that Christians should make moral decisions on the basis of the big vision of morality in the Bible, starting with the Ten Commandments, the vision of the prophets, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, life in the Spirit according to Paul, and a life of love and sacrifice, as you see in 1 John. And Revelation has a faithful witness as well. So that's another vision. And I think that we should be consistent with that and let all our behaviors when we're making moral decisions be shaped by the core vision of Jesus and life in the Spirit. So, and I think a lot of people aren't making those decisions. I think Babylon is encouraging and nudging a lot of believers to make decisions that are consistent with greed, ambition, competition, rather than the cross itself.
I mean, I definitely would agree with you on that. And I think one of the problems we have is we have a really large amount of people in the church in America. I can't speak for the church elsewhere, but in my little bit of the Church of America that I've had experience with, and just different pastors I've talked to throughout these years, is that our problem, one of the problems is we have a deep ignorance when it comes to biblical teaching and how to really understand the Bible, not just to understand it, right? But in its most important aspect, how to apply it in the sense of how does this make a difference, right, in our life? And when it comes to the book of Revelation, you've had people do really, really crazy things with it. There's all sorts of books people done crazy things with. But when we're talking about the conspiracies, and we've been talking about that back and forth throughout this whole conversation, but like conspiracy theories that are almost inspired by the book of Revelation, the way people start thinking, it's almost as if this book, it's really with its really profound and striking imagery, is that it attracts people that might take it down that kind of route, or it's open to interpretation. Okay. So how can someone who's hearing, the latest Bible teacher, who's a quack on YouTube or whatever, basically telling them about Revelation and all the things that Revelation means and how Putin is the antichrist and Trump is the new Cyrus and all these different things. So what are some interpretive principles that you think are easy for people to grasp, where they can come to something like this and say, you know what, maybe not understand what the book of Revelation is, but have understand it as just like what it's saying just by reading it, but at least have some kind of protective shields almost on their mind to filter out the crazy, so that we can have an actual number of legitimate options we could choose from in terms of an interpretation that would be faithful to the intention of the author and also contextualized for today. What are some ways that Will can read the book of Revelation and teach his kids how to read it in a way that isn't crazy, for lack of
We need the Iron Dome to knock down these missiles, huh? The crazy stuff. All right. I would say, there's a couple principles. Let's just say that you are a father, mother, and you want to help your children, your teens. Let's not give this to 6-year-olds. Your teens understand the book of Revelation. Number one, I would point them to faithful Bible teachers that they know and trust, and pay attention to what they say about Revelation. Now, if they go to a church that never talks about it, you're going to have a little bit more trouble. The second thing is, parents need to read the history of interpretation of the book of Revelation. Almost everybody, we have this in our book, the basic modes of interpreting Revelation. It's future, it's preterist, which means it's all taken place in the past. It's idealist. There's these basic things just to understand the fact that there isn't one interpretation that has ruled the history of the church. In fact, the dispensational model that is at work in the church today is largely a 20th century phenomenon. It's not the way people read the book of Revelation in the 5th century, although I don't know what they said in the 5th century, but they probably were doing a lot of speculating about crazy things. And then the third thing is this is so important, is to catch the big vision of the book. It's a narrative of the defeat of evil and the victory of justice. That's what the book is about. I mean, it's like Chronicles of Narnia. It's like Harry Potter. All these stories. It's like Homer. It's like Virgil. It's the Pilgrim's Progress. It's the same sort of novel, a story. It's not fiction, I don't think, but there's fictional dimensions to it. And to get the big picture really keeps us in check. And then the third thing is to recognize that the intent of the last thing is the intent of this text is to create faithful disciples. It's not to create speculators. And that when we spend all our time speculating, we're failing what John was actually trying to accomplish. He wasn't trying to get them to understand who the beast is. He gave it away. It was Nero. He isn't trying to figure out who the 7 hills are. That's Rome. Nobody in the 1st century would not have recognized that. But he does want them to recognize that in the church right now, there is idolatry and sexual immorality, and that's Babylon creeping into the church, and he wants that checked, and he wants a faithful witness to the Lamb. He wants moms and dads and everybody to follow Jesus in a consistent way that gives glory to God and brings attention to Jesus Christ. So stay away from the speculations.
Okay,
The speculators.
So a term I've heard you say quite a bit, and that's Babylon. And my first introduction to Babylon was probably by Bob Marley. He sang a song about the rivers of Babylon, and I don't really recall what the song was about, but he used the word Babylon, and I'm curious on why is Babylon kind of the metric by which all evil and morality will be judged by.
Bob Marley. My son loves Bob Marley. Redemption song.
Redemption song. Yeah.
He could play it on his guitar really well. It's really fun. Okay. Babylon in the Jewish world. So it's a 1st century text connected to the Jewish world. Babylon was the paradigmatic, corrupt, evil empire that captured the people of Israel and took them into exile, from which they were returned to the land, which led to the story of exile and return as liberation. So Babylon becomes the trope, the main image of a corrupted empire. In the 1st to 2nd century AD, Jewish writings, not just Christian, the book of Revelation, were using Babylon for the Roman Empire. So it's typical. It's like talking about, for me, my generation, draft number 151 for Vietnam. All right. So I can talk about Vietnam. Others are going to talk about the Desert Storm, who are going to talk about Iraq as corrupted powers that are ruining the world. And others are going to talk about Israel. And others are going to talk about Iran. And, it's that sort of thing. It's like Antietam, Gettysburg. It's that sort of image. So
it's like a call to remember. The image brings connotations of the evil empire. Hey, that's a Rage Against the Machine album. That the evil empire of Babylon, right? It's just metaphorical because they came in and they took Israel out of Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and then went and deported them out. And and that imagery would come to them. And that makes a lot of sense. As soon as you say it, a first century mind would have thought, a Jewish mind would have thought Rome, Babylon, this idea, this connection. So I think that's so helpful. When it comes to the book of Revelation, how do you see it being used? We've alluded to this, but I'd love for you to go into more depth into how do you see this being used in ecclesial church contexts and civil, outside of the secular context. How do you see it being used to stand against corruption, abuse, and sin in both those areas?
Well,
in the church
again,
and abroad.
Yeah, read Revelation 17 through 19. Ask people to say, what are the characteristics of a corrupted empire when John is describing Rome or Babylon here? What are the marks of an evil empire? That is where to begin. And then read Revelation 2 to 3 and see how those marks of Babylon are creeping into the church. So there it is. We get to discern political corruption, and we get to discern corruption in the church.
And so you get this political corruption, but this is the book of Revelation is for the people of God, correct?
Yeah.
I guess it's written to Christians in the first century. And so when we're taking it, we're like, okay, we're Christians, and so this book is written for us. Maybe it's not written to us, but it's written for us. And in it being written for us, there are certain things that we should be able to take from it that someone who wasn't a Christian or wasn't someone who's devoted follower of Christ wouldn't be able to take. Like, for instance, it would be difficult for me if someone was, if say the governor of Virginia, and of course this doesn't happen here because we have separation of church and state, but they're saying, hey, the book of Revelation, here's the corruptions it points out. You have this corruption in your church. We're gonna weed that corruption out through state coercive power. But it's to Christians, right, to resist the onslaught of culture. Is that like the onslaught of? Yeah, go ahead.
I know you can edit this. Is that correct?
Oh yeah.
I'm out of time here. I've got to get going. But okay. I've been texting. I've been chatting in the message to say.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't even. Hey, no worries. Yeah. How about? Well, can we do this? I'll just say we'll edit this out. We won't do that last question. And I'll just really quick say, hey, thanks for being on here. And how can people keep up with your work? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the program with us, Scott. It's been such a pleasure. How can people keep up with your work, and where can they get Revelation for the rest of us?
Well, the book is available on any bookstore. It's a fairly accessible publisher, Revelation for the Rest of Us, McKnight and Matchett. And I'm available on social media, Twitter or X, whatever it's called, Threads, Facebook. What are the other? Instagram,
Truth Social,
all those things.
Yeah. So I'm not.
I'll retruth you on Truth Social.
No, I'm not.
Well, thank you.
I have heard of it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And everyone, this has been Dr. Scot McKnight. You can check out his new book. And until next time, keep your conversations not left or right, but up. Thanks, guys. God bless and have a great week.
Yeah, thank you.